Hello, and welcome to another edition of NCI Live. I'm your host, David Groth. I'm a technical solutions specialist here at Network Center in Fargo, North Dakota. Joining me today is Jason Dahl, security with Network Center. How are you doing today, Jason?
Good, David. How are you?
I'm great today. So today we're going to be talking about kind of an interesting topic. We're going to be talking about open source software. But before we get into that, I'm just going to remind everyone that we are in fact live. So and we're live on both LinkedIn and YouTube. So if you have any questions, please feel free to message us there in either location, and we'll answer your questions live. And whatever we can do to help in those for those questions. That said, Jason, again, welcome. How are you doing today?
Good, really good.
Good. So we're going to talk today about open source software. So why don't you tell us a little bit, what is open source software?
So what open source software is just software that's freely available. The source code, meaning the source code, all of the components of the software is just free and available to anybody to use. There's multiple, caveats within that, but for the most part, again, it's free software that you can take. Like for me, I love open source because a lot of security tools are within open source. And it's a great way forward that, again, it's free, but again, there are, as we'll talk, caveats to that.
Yeah, and really the kind of the point of this is it's free, but is it really? Because,
correct.
The old saying, you don't get something for nothing. So you've got the free component of the software itself, but then there's everything around it that really we need to be talking about. Mm-hmm. So let's start with some examples. So, okay, the software itself is free. You can just download it and it runs and it works.
Yep.
But let's list off a couple of the gotchas. What are some of the things that aren't free about open source?
Yep. A lot of times when we get into open source products, one of the issues is that, yes, it is free, but a lot of times it's more complex than your novice computer user will be able to do to actually get the product to work. So a lot of the times it's not about the product. Yes, it's free, but again, you have to have the technical expertise and the technical know-how to get the product to do what it is you're looking for it to do. And that's actually the biggest thing, and that's where a lot of the caveats become, is that, yeah, we can download it, we can install it, but at the end of the day, that you need to maintain it, keep it updated. And a lot of times, you have to make sure that the product that you're going to download and use is actively being, developed. There are security warnings and security things coming out with it. And the great thing, with open source is that it's a community. It's a community around the entire world that is working to make this product better. And that's the great thing when it comes to open source, is that the community involvement and that it stays very active within it.
Right. And so one of the biggest open source software that people have all heard of is Linux. Linux in of itself is free. But as you mentioned, all of the support, all of those other pieces, That's where the cost comes in.
Mhm.
It's a fallacy that you can get Linux for free and you just turn it on and it runs and you don't have to do anything with it. It's completely free, no problem.
Correct. Yep.
But so
Where we all know that, yeah, Linux has come a long way, where now it offers a GUI where you can point and click and do things like that.
mhm.
But again, you have to know what you do, because Linux is not like Windows. It's not, similar to that. So again, it's a fantastic distribution. It's great to work with, but you have to have that skill set to be able to use it.
So to the point that you made, multiple points there. So for one thing about the source code, meaning that you can take that source code and make your own version of whatever the
Correct.
software is. So you can take the Linux source code and make your own version of Linux. You could make JSON Linux 1.0,
Yep.
and I
Correct.
make
Yep.
Dave Linux 1.0, Dave Nix.
Yep.
I'm patenting that. Everybody here to hear.
Yep. I like it. Yep.
Dave Nix.
I like it.
But here's the problem. Now there would have to be support for Dave Nix 1.0. And
Correct.
would have to be a set of patches and drivers for hardware and all these other things that go along with it. But that's the thing about some of these softwares, is that they call them forks that change to different versions and what have you.
Correct. Yep.
Linux, they call them flavors, but
Yep. So even Linux, it has the two of the major flavors would be, like a CentOS, a Red Hat,
Yep.
and then you have Debian, Ubuntu. Again, they're both Linux, but again, the way they both operate is much different.
Yep.
Debian and Ubuntu handles updating differently than how Red Hat and CentOS and those handle it. So again, it's even when, as a security engineer or as, just a user, you have to know, like, okay, I'm in this flavor, but that means, my initd is in a different place. The way my services run is in a different place than the different distributions. So a lot of times, most of us get stuck into one distribution. Me, I learned on Debian. I enjoy Debian because it's just a fantastic OS. But again, I've also worked on CentOS and Red Hat, where, both of those are also fantastic. It's just kind of pick your flavor and pick what, emulator you want to use for that product.
now to the point that you made about the community. So a lot of this, there is a way of doing the support. Whatever product you're going to do is via the community, right? Dave Nix 1.0. We're going to use that as an example in this case again. There's right now would be a community of one, me.
Yep.
But as it gains in popularity, there might be 5, 10, 15, 100, 1,000. Like the community for CentOS, that community has thousands of people.
Correct.
The community for Ubuntu, all tens of thousands of people, very large. So, in that respect, would you agree or disagree that the support can be provided by the community?
It can, as long as again, when we get into the different flavors of Linux, is that yes, you can go to the community and say, hey, I'm trying to do X, Y, and Z, or where again, it's traditional command line operations that you're working with. So yes, the community can usually help you, but then sometimes if it's like, look, this doesn't have the functionality, the great thing is with that community is that they will all get together and say, hey, this is how we can add this feature to this operating system for you. Mm-hmm. So that's the other great thing with community development, is that you're not having to really go and submit a ticket and then hope that Microsoft makes this feature available or something like that, because the community itself for CentOS, as an example, will come together and say, yes, we can develop this feature for you, and yes, we can look at how we can implement it. And that's the great thing with open source, is again, it's that community involvement. But on the flip side is that, let's say, with your Dave Nix, you started it and it's been rolling out, you have thousands of people, but then it's kind of just not getting updated, as an example. Yeah. Well, then what happens is that there's security vulnerabilities that are building within the operating system.
Yep, like abandon it.
Yep.
Like, forget it. Dave.
Yep, you're like, I have too much on my plate. I can't handle it right now. And then that's the one caveat also, is that when you get into some of the newer niche programs, they really are not as developed or continually being developed all the time, because again, they're just serving one function, and a lot of the times it's just not being looked at. It's kind of becomes an afterthought.
I have run into this in a couple of instances where a product will exist, but then it exists for a singular purpose, and nothing comes to mind like right away, but whatever that version is, but it's hardware dependent. Dave Nix, for example, it runs on current hardware, but hardware is constantly moving forward. And let's say in the next two generations of processor, they introduce some feature that makes previous versions have to be patched to include that new
correct
or function.
Yep, that new functions. Yep.
And then to that end, immediately Dave Nix becomes can't use it anymore.
Yep.
You either can't use Dave Nix or you can't use the new hardware, one or the other.
Yep. Or you reach out to the community and see if someone can help you add those features to that operating system.
Absolutely.
Yep.
That also brings up something else called a bounty. You want to explain to me what a bounty is?
So a bounty would be is that you can reach out to this community and say, hey, I want these 4 or 5 things added to CentOS or Dave Nix. And then what happens is that, and then you can say, I'll give $1,000 to whoever can develop this for me. And a lot of times that's the bounty. One of the bounty pieces behind it is that, yes, you can get something done for $1,000. Usually it's far cheaper than other places. But then even within that, too, you can have a bug bounty where, hey, if you do find something wrong with this operating system, let us know. We're going to pay you for helping us out secure this operating system.
Yeah. So let's switch gears for a minute. So we've talked about, Linux, CentOS, Debian, and so on as one of the more common ones. But the open source software is actually a lot more pervasive than people think, I would imagine.
Very much so. Very much so. There's, one of the ones that, I always will bring up because it was a big thing that happened about 2 years ago during Christmas time. It was Log4j.
Okay.
It is a open source log repository that was created. It's basically was put into hundreds of thousands of applications because the way that it handled logging, programmers and developers really enjoyed working with it because it was just so simplistic and easy to work with. But what happened during December of 2022, a security researcher happened to stumble upon a security vulnerability within Log4j. And then what this individual did unknowingly, he kind of just sent out a message to the world on LinkedIn and, a part of his forum. He didn't really think of the consequences of what would happen by releasing this information. And then when other developers started to see it, they're like, this is bad. This is really, really bad. Because the vulnerability was exploitable. It was a 0-day, meaning as it was found that day, it was released that day. So a lot of our work ended up happening around that Christmas time was just figuring out what products actually have this. Cisco was using it. There was a lot of programs that we use every day that use Log4j. And even with that, we still see it all over the place.
It was everything from software programs that needed their own logging to hardware that had built-in logging functions. Cisco switches was one of them. Firewalls, which is really bad for a security thing to a log with a security vulnerability. That was a particularly bad one. But now, would you characterize that as it being a function of it being open source? And did that help or hinder the fact that it was open source?
I think it was a pronged thing. So nobody was really going and making it apart and going in and saying, hey, we should be updating this program. Because again, it's just kind of one of those things that, like when I look at explorer.exe on my computer, I know that I have to have it. I really don't think much about it. And that's kind of the way log came, is that it was just it was a function that we were looking at. And they're like, okay, great. So how do we make this happen, without causing too many issues? And then ultimately, when it's not being actively developed like it is or wasn't, bad things happen. And that's where the scramble was for us to make sure that all of those things are working correctly.
Certainly, certainly. It's kind of like, Cisco saying, hey, this is something that was developed. Uh, I don't really have to look at it. I mean, it's just part of our system and it's stable. Everybody knows about it and it just works.
Yep.
So yeah, no, I totally get it. I'm going to just pause here for a second and let everyone know we are live. So if you have questions, please feel free to chat us those questions. We'll do our best. I understand we're having a little bit of audio and video problems. I do believe that might just be an internet problem. We can't control the internet, so we'll do our best. It's just the nature of it.
Yeah. It all started yesterday, so we'll see what actually happens with the Fargo internet area.
Yeah, the Fargo. That's one of the interesting. Well, side topic for another time, actually. But yes, if you have questions, please feel free to chat us live, and we will answer them on here. Okay, so now I'm going to just branch off into another set of stuff. What are some of the more common softwares that you might have heard besides Linux? Are there any others out there that you've heard?
Oh yeah, there's ton. LibreOffice, again, if you don't want to purchase Microsoft Office, LibreOffice is a fantastic tool. Again, it doesn't have all the little niceties that when you work with Excel or something like that within LibreOffice. Those are things that you have. You have other programs. That's the thing. There's so many, especially within the security realm. We have Metasploit. We have all these other functions that we use that are open source to be able to attack, defend, or do what we have to do within the security arena for open source. And that's just the great thing with it. Is that, again, you can take it, you can rework it, you can redistribute it, but you have to make sure that you're actively developing it and you're staying a part of it. One of the programs that I love is called Fail to Ban.
Yes.
You can put it on, an endpoint. You can set parameters saying, hey, if someone from this IP address enters in their password 2 or 3 times incorrectly, it automatically locks them out and bans them from that system. So a lot of times, especially on internet-facing devices, when they're doing their scans and they're trying to hack into systems, Fail to Ban and be like, hey, I've seen this wrong. I see basically a password spray or something is going on, that immediately lock down that IP address so it can no longer talk to the server.
So effective, yeah, I like it.
Yeah, it's simple, effective, and it works fantastic. It's not hard to set up, and that's one of the ones that I personally like very much. But then you also have on the flip side where they can take that product and commercialize it as well, which people have. So that's the other thing with it that you can take from open source.
Absolutely. A couple of them that are real popular also is like MySQL, SQL database.
Oh, very much. Yep.
The most popular databases out there, to the point where Oracle actually has a commercial version of open source free version, and then they have the commercial version. But the commercial version isn't any different than the free version. It just has support with it.
The support. Yep.
And then of course, the Apache, the web server.
Apache.
That's it is the number one web server. There is.
There is nothing else. Yep, I would agree with you.
Installed hosts, I believe, is how they, not in terms of pages served, but I think just in terms of installed hosts, it's the number one.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's the thing that a lot of people don't actually realize too, is that the majority of the internet is actually hosted on Linux, Unix type devices. Because again, they have Apache, they have these open source programs that they can use, which again, it's for what you get with Linux compared to Windows, is you just get a far more secure, because again, it is open source. People can look at the underlying source code and say, hey, this doesn't look right, let's fix this. And so that's why Linux and Apache and Postgres and all these other MySQL are so popular, is because of that community involvement.
Sure. And it's that is one other thing. We talk about the community and the development. Normally in a company, when you have a very large company with a particular set of software that they're developing, they're going to dedicate a team of developers of, I don't know, what, 20 developers, 30, depending on what.
Yeah, 20, 30.
20, 30. Here, we might have thousands of developers looking at a zero-day exploit and going, this is exactly, like, we need to fix this now. And you got all of them looking at it.
Yep.
And they actually, in most cases, have an entire GitHub, an entire set of software repositories that can follow a traditional development cycle, and they can bring it to resolution much faster. So there's a benefit there.
Yep. There is. Well, and even, as an example with the Log4j, when that kind of fell to the side and everybody's like, holy crap, this is bad. That's where the community and commercial organizations stepped up and said, hey, we do need to be doing better at this. So it actually was a light that was shined on it saying, hey, these programs, even though we've commercialized some of them, we need to make sure that we're still looking at those and making sure that they're still being developed and secured as much as possible.
Absolutely. To add a couple others that in terms of open source products, there is, in many cases, and I think you alluded to this, that there's, in some cases, the open source software has a feature for feature parity, like it's a one for one feature, at least for the 80% of the features. And in some, there's not only one for one, but there's more. Like, well, so one of the softwares that I'm personally familiar with, and I did a lot of work with, is Asterisk, and it's an open source voice.
Yep.
Matter of fact, there are many systems that use Asterisk in one form or another. It has not only a large following, but it also has commercial sponsorship by a company called Sangoma, who makes voice hardware. But a lot of things have been developed on Asterisk, and it was used as a voice platform where you could develop voice applications. I have one friend who was actually on Shark Tank, who developed, what does he call it? The Jolly Roger Telephone Company. His name happens. But what it does, it uses Asterisk, and what it does is, let's say a telemarketer calls you, and it mimics a human. So you can say, hello, and then they say, yes, Mr. Smith, and yes, I'd like to, da 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 da.
Yeah.
And he goes, you know what, hang on a second, and then yells to the background. So basically, it makes the telemarketer waste their time, but it plays and it listens to the voice of what's happening. So it uses Asterisk's built-in functions.
I didn't know that. That's
Look it up, Jolly Roger Telephone Company, and they have.
Yeah, I'll have to.
And it's a friend of mine. His name is Roger Anderson, and he was on Shark Tank. Incidentally, his partner turned down the Shark's offer. So it was. I hit him up. I said, "Dude, what's up?"
Yeah, why? Yeah. Why wouldn't you? Come on now.
He's an engineer at heart. He likes just the geeky aspect. He's not a
tinkering. Yeah.
Or at least from my opinion. But on the opposite side of that, fun fact, the largest contact center software in use in terms of installed hosts is a product called ViciDial. A lot of people haven't heard of it.
Oh, ViciDial.
ViciDial, VICIDIAL. And in my previous life, one of my largest was setting up contact centers on ViciDial. And there are some big names that use ViciDial. And you know how if you're ever in telecom, you can tell by the hold music, the default hold music, or certain default prompts, you can tell what kind of system you're using to. If you listen to any telemarketing calls that you get, and you hear a ding ding, or you hear a boink right before you get the call, that's ViciDial.
Yeah.
That's ViciDial. And
that you can tell immediately.
And you'll be able to tell that that's what it is. And they use it because it's free. It's relatively easy to use, and it's
right, severely reliable.
98% bug free. Every now and again, I would run into something that was, what's going on here? And usually because people were trying to push it way too hard. But I will say this is one of my other personal things about open source. Usually it's written by engineers, and they've never run it. They've never run it by a UI designer. Like.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It looks like
they're not looking at that. They're looking at it from the engineering.
They look, I need to see everything in one page. Not we can make a menu. No, let's just put everything in one page. So
ViciDial
is the same way. If you look at the agent interface, it's it's just this side of an 8-bit video game. It's pretty bad.
Yeah.
So.
But it gets the job done, and it works.
Yeah. Oh, that's exactly right. It gets the job done. It's inexpensive, and I say inexpensive because the underlying hardware was expensive. You had to have a, when you were dialing. In this case, this is back when dialing was legal, maybe unethical, but legal.
Legal. Yeah.
It was. It required a lot of servers because you had to get that many calls being made. So you had to have 6 or 7 servers.
Yep. So yeah, a bunch of POTS lines and
SIP lines in that case.
SIP lines. Yep.
So we're getting close to the end here. Let's talk just real quickly about some of the companies that, some of the bigger companies that are using open source software but have their own commercial versions, shall we say, or take an open source product and converted it into a commercial product.
Yep. Some of the bigger products that you look at, for instance, like Nessus Tenable, that actually was created under OpenVAS. OpenVAS is still available. You can still use it. Again, it's not user friendly like it would be with Tenable Nessus, professional for vulnerability scanning. IBM, they have something called OSSIM, which is a security platform, which again, it's absolutely free. You can go to their website, download it. But again, their commercial version you pay for. But again, like we discussed, you're paying for that support and that technical know-how on how to actually do it. Other ones that use it a lot are just a lot of security firms. Again, when it gets to logging, they use Elk Stack and they use these other things that takes a lot of information at one time. But again, at the end of the day, they're like, hey, yes, you can go and download this free product and we can show you the 4 or 5 areas that you need to focus on. But that's going to take you a lot of time and effort and work to be able to configure it, where you can pay us and we'll come in and give you our commercial part of it. And that's the other thing, with open source is that it's available and you can commercialize it and redistribute it if you're going to support it in some way other than what it was intended. And that's the great thing with it is that you do have so many options with it that can make your life a lot easier.
So really, to summarize, is it free? The software is free, but what you pay for, you're paying for the updates, really, and the continued support via the community or by a commercial organization. And if it's supported by a commercial organization, you've got stability, and stability in IT is tantamount to
paramount.
It's the most important thing. You've also got more security, right?
Yep. Well, and even like with Red Hat is Linux. It's absolutely free if you go to Ubuntu or CentOS or Debian. But if you want Red Hat, you have to purchase a license from them. Their version of Linux is no different than the other ones. But again, you're paying for that support, that know-how, and that development, or the continued development of security within
and the continued development, exactly. That's really ultimately, and then you're paying to get into a support system, and you're paying for knowledge. As with any IT,
with anything,
you're really paying for knowledge because you're going to find people and organizations that are going to support your IT infrastructure that have the knowledge of those open source systems. And you just want to pick from whatever system that you're picking, say Apache, MySQL, Linux, that group is large enough. You don't want to find a product that there's only 3 people in the world that can support it.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that the product's not bad, because it may serve a function that you need. But again, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that it's being continually developed because, again, hackers and people like myself are always looking for a way in to an organization, and that's one of the ways that we always look.
Absolutely. Well, it's been fun. We come to the end of our time here.
Great talk.
It's gone very quick.
Really quick.
For those of you watching, if you didn't get a chance to answer your question, didn't want to ask a question or didn't see it, you can feel free to send us an email at info@netcenter.net. You can go to our website at www.netcenter.net. You can also contact us on any of our social media channels. You can also go ahead and subscribe to either our LinkedIn or our YouTube channel, which and then you want to, of course, hit the notification bell when we do go live, which we do approximately every 2 weeks. So, to that end, Jason, again, this has been great talking with you. I really do appreciate
Yeah,
it.
you as well.
And I know we're going to be talking more about other topics in the future. This has definitely been great. And for those of you
Yeah,
that
thank
have
you so
joined,
much.
those of you that have joined us, thanks again for joining us here on NCI Live.